Yes.
Could you remind everyone to mute their mics? I'm hearing a lot of background shuffling and noise.
That's my cat eating.
So
Okay, you are live.
we are live, and I'm going to call the meeting to order. With that, I'd like to have the approval agenda for February the 1st. Moved by Doug, second by Sherry. Any questions or comments? All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Any conflicts of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? Showing none. I'd like adopt the minutes of the January 18th, 2021 Stone Mills Council meeting as presented. Looking for a motion. Moved by John, second by Kevin. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. No delegations or deputations tonight, so we're going to get down to staff reports. And we're going to start with Manager Planning, Deputy Clerk Sands on the shoreline protection update.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. I just have a very quick update as it relates to the shoreline protection regulatory controls that were discussed approximately 2 years ago in 2019 before council. The information report before you on tonight's agenda essentially speaks to the verbal information update that staff and management provided to council at that July 15th, 2019 meeting, with the intent to regulate shoreline development through the inclusion of additional regulation by update, as well as site plan control modifications to that bylaw, which is 21 years old at this time. First and foremost, the updates to the official plan document are required, as that's our pinnacle or high-level vision document for the municipality that provides an educational opportunity, as well as allows for that language and regulation to be adopted at a high level. As many of you know, the official plan update was well underway in 2019, which was then halted at the onset of COVID. We, specifically management staff, as well as the consulting team who was working on that update, that 5-year official plan update at IBI Group, have been working in conjunction with the County of Lennox and Addington staff to facilitate the continued update of that document. And we are working through that this spring and summer months. With the introduction of the 2020 provincial policy statement, there's been some commentary back and forth between lower tier and upper tier staff, essentially to determine what the next most logical step for update would be, given that change in provincial documentation. So just again, I just want to mention and update staff briefly at this time to say that it's not lost. That shoreline protection work is something that is on the workload agenda for staff moving forward in 2021. And we do see that as continuing forward as originally presented in 2019 through by way of official plan update, as well as site plan control update. So I'm happy to answer any questions at this time as it relates to the information report. The recommendation from staff for council tonight is to essentially accept and file the information report at this time. Thank you.
Go ahead, Wenda.
Just wondering, Jason, I know in the past there have been some limitations by what municipalities can do in this regard. And I'm just wondering how do you envision us being able to put some teeth into this through these mechanisms?
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Lalonde's question, the official plan is, as I mentioned, that higher level document that we've learned may not have that on the ground regulation or rigor from a regulatory perspective, but essentially that forms our vision and our development objectives as a municipality. And when you open yourself up to any form of development, so by way of minor variance, consent application, zoning amendment, any of those forms of Planning Act applications, the official plan document and the policies contained therein become applicable and in effect. So that's the first and foremost. I would say that higher level document is one that sets the educational component to that conversation, as well as the guiding the guiding principles that we look to follow in future development. Now, to your point specifically, that's not one that I see as being the best way to regulate on the ground development by way of site plan control. That is the mechanism under the Planning Act, Section 41, that we see as providing opportunities to regulate on the ground development. So with the higher level policies in our official plan, as well as that site plan bylaw that allows or subjects waterfront development to that level of control, then the municipality will have the ability to provide specific requirements, for example, riparian corridor protection, limited areas of development from a site alteration perspective, and retention of mature vegetation perspective. All of that documentation then registered on title through or by way of site plan control. So those are the two pieces of Planning Act legislation that I see as being the most applicable. To your question, if one were done without the other, it would be, in my opinion, by no means effective. It's required to be in part and collaborative.
Okay, good enough. Anybody else? Go ahead, John.
Yes, thank you. Jason, have you looked at any regulatory material from other municipalities that might have imposed some kind of control on shoreline development, or have you got that far in the process?
Through you, Your Worship, Deputy Reeve Wise, are you referring to along this mechanism, i.e. in terms of official plan policies, or a separate standalone mechanism like a shoreline protection bylaw, or all?
Yeah,
of
the
above?
latter, I think. I expect that most municipalities have positive language around retaining the natural environment and protecting riparian corridors and so on. I just wonder if any have got to the point of actually writing legislation to support that official plan language.
From a shoreline protection bylaw specifically, from that perspective, I'm aware of one local municipality, Township of South Frontenac, that's looking at bringing that legislation in based on their significant uptake on waterfront development on the lakes. However, it's my understanding that none of our neighboring municipalities, I call that Eastern Ontario local municipality group, has a standalone bylaw. It's more of a collaborative effort through mechanisms like site plan control, site alteration permits, official plan and zoning bylaw policy that would then provide that regulation.
So, if I may, that's a discussion we can have once the official plan is adopted, I assume.
Through you, absolutely. To my point, previous, I believe our current official plan lacks policy direction with respect to shoreline development, waterfront development policies, period, and the overall, essentially, riparian ribbon of life. So, regardless on the mechanism on the other end or the tail end of the regulatory control, I think our official plan, 5-year official plan update, is the absolutely perfect venture to incorporate that policy legislation and policy direction in our document at this time. Following that and the public information sessions that go along with that official plan update, I fully suspect conversation around future direction in regards to site plan control bylaw update changes, and any other mechanism that one desires in regulating such use.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, just one more. In the meantime, I mean, it sounds like we're still looking at least a few months, if not a year or more ahead, before we've got some kind of site plan control or whatever other mechanism we come up with. When someone buys a property on the shore of a river or lake in the township, do we give them any information, such as is provided by Conservation Authority, other environmental agencies, or friends groups like the Friends of the Salmon or Napanee? Do people get some education material about preserving shorelines and so on?
Through you, not to speak for or on behalf of the entire municipality, through the planning department, I am not aware of a trigger that comes into effect when a property changes hands, that there is a documentation that's sent out as a sort of a welcome package to give them insight as it relates to the importance of their parcel. When there is development proposed on any of those sites, that's when I would say the direction and policies of the building department, the zoning bylaw, and Quinte Conservation Authority more so come into effect, as opposed to the trigger of property land sale. So
maybe at the very least, when someone applies for a building permit of some kind on a shoreline property, could we give them some of that educational material? I think you know the kind of thing that's out there. There's all kinds of pamphlets and probably virtual information as well that could be provided to people. If that's not being done, it would be an easy way at least to start the educational process.
Through your worship, I don't want to overstep and speak for chief building official, but I don't see a concern with that in any regard.
Well, I don't see any point in making that a motion. It seems self-evident that it would be a good idea. And if anyone sees no problem with that, I would ask that we hand out that material at the very least when someone applies for a permit on a shoreline.
Okay, we'll go to Kevin and then Doug. Go ahead, Kevin.
Along John's line, I was wondering before if we couldn't, is there any way, maybe there isn't, when we're sending out the tax bills, if people have shoreline property, that you could put that very information in, some educational information right in their tax bill, knowing that they own, if we can sort that out. I don't know whether staff is able to do that or not, but it's just another way of getting some education out there.
Okay, go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I talked to Planner Sands this afternoon on this. This is a very tricky issue, and he has just told you that nobody really has any type of controls in our neighboring municipalities. Now, in what Jason is suggesting to us, it's just the start of a process. If I am understanding it correct, I mean, we're going to put some vision into the OP, but the vision doesn't really do anything other than give you the ability later to work from that vision. Something has to be developed after that. Now, Jason's talking about site plan control, fine and good. That's great for a property that's being developed, but that won't touch the existing property. So and tonight's not the night that we're going to deal with this, but we have to be aware that at some point in time in the future, after the OP is developed, that we do have some hard thinking here to balance the needs of the landowners and development at the same time to protect the environment. We've got some hard thinking to do. One question for Jason, and that is, Jason, the county's official plan, is there going to be an issue between the county and us?
Through your worship, with respect to what, Councillor Davison? The shoreline waterfront development
Yeah, are
regulation?
they going to be in the same step with us? Because they have basically authority over us, a higher level.
Yeah, through you, I don't see any challenges with that. The county's official plan is essentially even a higher level policy document than ours. The general principles of the natural heritage corridors and the natural heritage areas are protected under the provincial policy statement, which then fall down and are protected at the county level, the upper tier level. The County of LNA is working on, I'm not sure their timing, they're working on a natural heritage study, which will fit and align well from a policy document perspective with this conversation. So my proposal, or I guess my vision of incorporating some stronger language within our official plan would, at this time, would align with the provinces in the 2020 provincial policy statement, would align with the current official plan at the county level, and further align to that natural heritage work that is to come in, I suspect, post-COVID. I'm guessing, without the likes of Mr. Paul and McDonald from the county and on this call, I suspect that will be now bumped to 2022. And my only fear of continuing to bump our official plan update in the wings of that documentation or policy update is we're starting to get beyond our 2021 window of our 5-year update to our document, as well as that work that IBI completed back in 2018-19 timeframe.
Okay, so, I mean, we have to start somewhere. I would move that we accept this proposal and we move forward to getting something started in the official plan.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Look for a seconder. Sherry? Any more questions or comments? All in favor of that motion? Sorry, Kevin, did you have something?
Well, I was just going to say, is the motion just to receive it? Doug,
Well,
is
he
that
made a
what you're
motion
saying?
to, we can put, if you want to put to receive the report.
Yeah,
in
to
there.
receive it, but yeah, move forward because Mr.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Planner
To
Sands is
receive and move forward. Fair enough?
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, all in favor? Carried. Treasurer Bouchard, request for support for a resolution to request a 1-year extension of deadlines on the ORG 588-17 Assets Management Plan for Municipal Structure under the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act 2015. Go ahead, Christina.
So the resolution is in support of the Municipal Finance Officers Association of Ontario, and it's in regards to the Strategic Asset Management Plan where we put in place about 1.5 years ago, and the next phase is to put the levels of service into the plan for all of our infrastructure. Unfortunately, what they're asking, or fortunately, I guess in our case, is they're asking that we support the resolution to ask for the 1-year extension on the levels of service. It's due this July, and many municipalities are behind on it due to the fact that we've had to take our other interests, such as COVID, and put them forward first versus figuring out our levels of service. So I'm asking council if you would like to support the resolution for the Municipal Finance Officers of Association of Ontario. That's to go to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing's representative.
Go ahead, Wenda. I can't hear you.
You're muted.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the recommendation to support this.
Okay. Moved by Wenda, looking for a seconder. Kevin?
I had a question.
Okay, we're looking for a seconder first, then we can debate it. Seconder by Debbie. Okay, any questions? Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, Christina, are you in favor of putting it off or moving it out that year?
I am, because the levels of service, they're also considering aspects such as asking for council's input and possibly ratepayers' input, and that's been a little difficult being able to do so right now.
Oh, that's fine. I just wondered how you felt about it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. Public Works Manager Thompson, Stone Mills Township e-waste agreement report.
Thank you, Your Worship. The first report is electronic waste service agreement with Goat Transport. Some may not be aware, but the EOS agreement, they ended in December 31st of 2020. If you look at the budgetary impacts, it's kind of minimal based on the tonnage that we put out in 2020. It's about $725 a year. Any questions on that?
Go ahead, Doug.
Jeff, just goat transport, are they charging us that or paying us that?
They're paying us $130 a ton. So the tonnage that we put out in
$1,300 a
2020.
ton.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay,
And
well, that's all. It was hard to tell there whether they were charging us for it or paying us for it.
Paying us for it. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Kevin, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Jeff, were they paying us 200 before and now it's 130?
That's correct. Under the EOS program, so the Electronic Stewardship Recycling Program, where we're getting $200 a ton.
And now they want to give us 130.
Now that program ended, it's a private company that has been doing it since 2009, and they supply the shipping container and the storage, the bins, the wrap,
Right.
the cardboard,
Okay.
everything you see in the e-waste bins.
Well, I just thought that's the way it read, and I wasn't quite clear. So thank you for clearing that up.
Any other questions from anybody? Looking for a motion to receive the report titled Electronic Waste Collective Service Agreement. Moved by Kevin, second by Sherry. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Okay, your
Through
second
you.
one, bylaw enforcement agreement report. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Your Worship. The second one, bylaw enforcement agreement. This has already went through the county council and county staff, and the agreement is written as such that we just have to sign and send back that we would enforce any no parking within the county right away.
So you were comfortable with this report?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions? Go ahead, Kevin.
I just have to ask you, has any of that changed, or is it all the same as it was previous? Like I read through it and I couldn't really grasp what it was.
There is an amended copy there, so a few items would have changed. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the bylaw enforcement, we were paying for that before, and we're going to pay for it again. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, and with our municipality, it's not as as big a factor as in the larger towns and
Right.
and
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Doug.
Now move it.
You move. Okay, Doug has made a motion to accept report. Seconder? Debbie? All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Okay, the winter maintenance agreement, Tweed. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Your Worship. The winter maintenance agreement with Tweed. I know we've had a slight winter, not too busy, but we're finally getting around to getting an agreement with Tweed. This is the location where we had to reduce the weight limit on Flynn Bridge. We can't cross it with our trucks, so they're coming in from the boundary, approximately 1.4 kilometers. There's no monetary value to either municipality. We sign this agreement, they'll take it to their council and they'll sign. But future agreements, we're going to cover off some of the maintenance that we do now, and we have no agreements on the boundaries. And they may plow a section for us, and we plow a section for them. So going forward, we have to get that sorted out and into an agreement. But in the short term, we'll go with this agreement, and everybody was in favor of it.
Any questions for Jeff? Go ahead, John.
Yes, thank you. So the bridge won't support plow trucks, and they'll do the road on the west side of the bridge. How do they clean the bridge?
We have a local contractor farmer that has a tractor, and we have a little agreement with them that they'll at the end of the year we might have a small invoice to pay for them cleaning the bridge deck off.
Okay. I was sure you had that covered. But...
A handshake agreement.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Kevin, do you have something?
Oh, I was just gonna make a motion that we accept that.
Okay, moved by Kevin, second by Sherry. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Okay, Centerville road speed report.
Thank you, Your Worship. I know there was a lot of attachments with this report, a lot of factors considered. We had the OPP install a spy cam or speed spy for a 24-hour period. A lot of that data collected was in the attachments. We used the TAC manual to warrant or determine if the speeds were needed to be reduced based on a bunch of parameters. I'm not sure whether anybody got the attachment for the report. It didn't happen to go on last week, but it was added today. So if you look at the average speeds for the eastbound and westbound, there doesn't seem to be an issue there. It's the average speed was 69. There is some alarming speeds of 105, but you're not gonna solve those people. Any questions on that at all, or any information needed on the attachments that were there?
We'll start with John, then we'll go to Kevin. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, can you explain in language that people can understand what these different percentiles actually mean, Jeff?
So the 85th percentile, so 85% of the traffic would be speeding or outside of that tolerated range. Or so there was a 50 percentile, there was the 85th percentile. Not sure whether that answered your question.
So those numbers aren't speeds; those are numbers of vehicles.
Those are numbers of vehicles.
Okay, that's
199 captured in that 24-hour period.
Right.
And 64.5 were above the average or above the posted speed.
And I guess the real question is how much above the posted speed were they? Because everybody knows if it's 80 and driving conditions are good, people are going to be doing 89 or 90.
Right.
It's those ones that are up around 100 that are scaring people.
And you'll see out of versus the hour, if you look at some of the attachments, it's like 2 vehicles, 3 vehicles that were outside of that range.
And did those that were traveling at unsafe speeds, was that more at nighttime, or was there any sort of distribution in terms of day or night that you could recognize?
There is, I just have to pull it up.
Okay. Maybe it was in there and I overlooked it.
Yeah, so on the one attachments, it's the count versus the hour.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right, that clears it up. Thank you.
Cleared up? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Kevin, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, a quick question. So is it staying at 80, Jeff, or is it moving down? I'm assuming it's staying at 80. Am I right?
So I didn't have a recommendation with it, but we lower a section that doesn't warrant it. It makes it difficult on all the other requests that we get. So this is kind of a manual to compare, I guess, that we follow. Even the accident history, the accident history was minor. That was included in
Right.
an attachment.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead, Doug.
So Jeff, based on the information you got here, it looks like, but I would like to hear you say it, the recommendation is it stay the same? There's
Stays
no
the same.
No reason, okay.
And that OPP had the same opinion after their review.
I don't see anything there that's drastically out of line.
And people drive to the conditions if they feel comfortable driving at that speed. That's I know you're always going to have the one-off that is doing the 100 plus, but if people feel comfortable driving at 85, 90, they'll drive 85, 90.
That's one of the problems of improving a road is that people feel like they can drive faster on it.
Right.
But I don't see that being a huge issue there.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Motion to receive.
Motion to receive by Kevin and the seconder. Motion for second by Doug. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Okay, we'll move to the chief building official Detler. Number one is a deferred item from the January 18th, 2021 Stone Mills Council meeting. Go ahead,
Yes.
Jake.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a deferred item where staff took a difficult report to council the last meeting, recommending that given the uncertainty around COVID and the uncertainty of when we're going to be able to open the arena to users again, to take the ice out. And at that time, it was decided to defer it to this meeting. In the intermediate period, there hasn't been a lot of questions answered regarding if the users are going to be able to use that 10 days from now. Still in a difficult place in terms of what we should do in this regard. Just hoping to get council's thoughts on a direction.
I would just like to refer questions to the Deputy Wise. He's on the health board in Kingston. John, have you heard any rumor of anything coming shortly or not, or?
Not a word.
Not a word, okay.
Nothing. Whereas just as in the dark as anybody else is. And at this point, I mean, everybody's hoping that the lockdown will be lifted on the 11th, at least in areas that currently have very low case numbers. But it's anybody's guess. The Premier seems bent on a province-wide response to this. His concern is that if we have selective liftings of lockdowns, that people from areas that remain locked down, namely Toronto and Peel and places like that, will start traveling to places where the lockdown has been lifted. Now, I can't see busloads of people coming to our recreation center to play shinny, but it's hard to start picking out, this and that can be done and so on. I know in Alberta, they just lifted restrictions on people who do one-on-one fitness. So regular gyms that are sort of come one, come all remain closed, but people who have personal trainers and a secure place to be trained, they can go ahead. This would be great for me. I go to a gym where it's just me and a personal trainer. So I'd like to see that here. But so far, there's no indication that there's going to be any sort of selective lifting. I really think it's going to be all or nothing. And I would suggest that we again defer this decision. We did have correspondence from Angela Walker that minor hockey, if they could, in the next, I would say this month, if they could continue with their season, they would be willing to go to the end of April. In which case, it would, if we have the lockdown lifted on the 11th, we'd have 2.5 months where we could we could have hockey at the rink again. So I would move that we once again defer the decision on this until after we hear what the province does on the 11th.
Hey, Doug, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think we want to question everything that's going on here. Extending the season gets extremely expensive because you get into warmer weather. Also, and I know that from past experience because we've done that in the past for certain situations, playoffs, that went longer than we thought and things like that. But the cost of in warm weather of keeping the ice in gets pretty prohibitive. Also, we've got work to do this summer, this spring in the arena, and we want to be careful that we don't impact that work that we're skating on ice that should be out so they can be fixing the boards. So I don't know where we get that information, but I think it all has to be weighed.
Jake, do you want to step in there at all?
Yeah, so you're kind of leading into the next item there, but yeah, no, there is scheduled work this coming off season. I don't have a start date on that yet, or even a feel on when that start date might be. Another thing that Councillor Davison just mentioned, it's based on my looking at the hydro bills that come in, that actually, believe it or not, that the most expensive bills are usually in January and February, and as opposed to October, just simply because we've got so many electric heaters working in a -20 situation. It tends to actually overcompensate the amount that the compressors are running during a very, a warm situation. Anyways, just that's my experience with looking at the hydro bills.
You have your hand up, Wenda?
I was just going to second the motion.
Okay. All right. I guess I have no problem, my own mind, keeping it in for a while because the only hydro we're using extra is run the compressors, and stays like his the last few mornings, we'll be all right for a while. But anyway, we have a motion on the floor and a seconder. John, do you have any time in that, like how long or I mean, next meeting, or you said you defer?
Yeah, I guess till the next meeting, because by that time we will have heard what the announcement is on February 11th. And if it's simply to continue the lockdown into March, then obviously we're done. It just wouldn't be worth opening for 3 or 4 weeks. Right. But if they do lift the lockdown on the 11th, then assuming that Doug's concern about start of construction isn't going to be a problem, I think it's money well spent to extend that season. We've got all kinds of kids that have had not a lot to do for too long a time, and adults too need a recreational break. So I don't have any problem, if it costs an extra $2,000 or $3,000 to pay for the hydro. So
okay, good enough. Okay, we have go ahead, Kevin.
Just a quick question: if our next meeting is on the 16th, if they do open it on the 11th, they're just going to open up the arena again and start things moving.
Go ahead, Jake.
Yes, Councillor Richmond, exactly. If the lockdown is lifted, the users will be using it by the time the next council meeting is here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, have a motion on the floor. Everybody in favor of the motion? Opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, update on Township of Stone Mills investing in Canada infrastructure program. Go ahead, Jake.
Thank you, Your Worship. We haven't received any official notice, but we have received unofficial notice that our grant application for significant work to the replacement of the ice surface and boards and header area to the Stone Mills Recreation Center. For those that don't know, that ice surface, that concrete that we're playing on right now was installed in 1972, and the brine has been, circulating in that pad since 1972. This would allow us this summer, hopefully, to replace that ice surface and replace the boards. And that, with a grant that we actually got in 2019, would allow us basically to reinstall the entire refrigeration system in the Stone Mills Recreation Center. We're expecting within the next couple weeks an official announcement from the two levels of government above us.
Yeah. Thanks, Jake. I was talking to Daryl Kraft. He said the money's issue. And still to the day there, the feds are giving so much, 400, and I think the province 3 some. So anyway, it's on the way. Okay, so I'm looking for a motion to go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'll give you the motion to receive, and I would also mention that I'm now hearing dogs barking. If people can mute their mics, please.
That's Wenda again.
You and your animals.
But we have a motion on the floor. Moved by John, second by Doug. All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thanks, Jake. Okay. Items for consideration. Letter from CCCE seeking clarification in response from January 18th, 2021 inquiries. Okay, so we have a letter in front of us. Anybody want to comment on it? Question? Go ahead, John.
Yep.
Yeah, well, there's I think there's four questions raised here, and I would just wonder if members of staff have been considering the technical aspects of these questions, and for example, I'm not going to deal with them in order. I'd like to go to the last one first, just because it's a fairly straightforward inquiry, namely that the new proposal would be for 499 sows. The little pigs aren't considered. The question is, would the sows be farrowing off-site, or just how would those little wiener pigs be considered in this development? This is obviously not something that we have any control over, but I'm wondering if anyone has talked to Peter Doris or someone from OMAFRA to get a response to that question. Jason or Jake or whoever.
Jake, you want to? Sorry, go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, I actually spoke to Peter today about that, and I have correspondence. I actually had some correspondence before the building permit was issued regarding how this works. So they are farrowing in that building, but don't count as weaners until, roughly they are moved away. And I mean, the difference between this application and the last application is that they were going to be weaned and remain for roughly a month after they're weaned in the barn. In the new barn, they'll be transported as soon as the weaning process begins to another site.
Go ahead, John.
Okay, thank you. I kind of thought that was the case. Their manure output while they're nursing is basically negligible. So the third one is about conditions and building permits. And I think at our last meeting, when Tony Fleming was saying that only council or the building official could put a condition on a building permit, my understanding subsequent to that, asking questions, is that he was referring to conditions that would apply strictly to the construction aspects of the application. In other words, if someone proposed a building that did not conform to some specific aspect of the building code, but they had an alternative that would in some way address the intent of the code, that a permit could be issued with a condition that so-and-so be done to address the intent of the building code. This does not mean, in my understanding, and I'm putting this out there for comment to make sure I've got this straight, a condition cannot be applied to a building permit that is not relevant to the requirements of the building code. it'd be something like if you wanted to buy a car and the dealer said, well, I'll only sell you this car if you sign an agreement not to speed. In other words, it's unrelated to the business aspect of buying a car. Or if someone wanted to build a house, council could not instruct the building official to make the issuance of a permit conditional on someone not establishing an illegal business in the house, maybe growing pot without a license or something like that. Jake, could you comment on that? Because I think this is an important point of clarity, because people are probably going to assume that you issued that permit and that council should have somehow made the issuance of the permit conditional on the old site plan agreement conditions. And I don't believe that we could legally do that.
Go ahead, Jake.
Thank you. Yes, in terms of your question, Deputy Reeve Wise. So when we sit through these site plan control meetings and zoning bylaw meetings, you're basically handing down a set of parameters for me to live with, so that if they fulfill all the obligations and everything that they are proposing is in line with the zoning bylaw, I'm allowed to issue the zoning bylaw or site plan control, then I can issue a permit. And if for whatever reason the proposal does not comply with the zoning bylaw, I don't issue a permit, or you would have to go through council and the planning, in this case, Jason, for some sort of special approval in terms of relief measures from a planning approval process. In this case, he's met all the obligations of our comprehensive zoning bylaw, and he doesn't need the site plan control, which he did in the first application, and that's why I was able to issue the permit. So in my job, it's a little different than council or Jason, in the sense that I have no discretionary powers to put down conditions on, I would call it arbitrary conditions on one applicant versus another applicant. My job is black and white. Either they comply with the law and I issue a permit, or they don't apply and I don't issue the permit. I have no ability to use any discretion, and that's kind of how the building code and the whole building permit process works.
Jason,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
I'll leave it at that. There's two other
That's very
questions there. Maybe some other councilors want to weigh in on this one.
I think Jason wants to step in here first before we go ahead. Go ahead, Jason.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just quickly to Deputy Reeve Wise, your question, and to further some of that explanation from Chief Building Official Detler, the short answer, and I think the targeted question before us tonight, as it relates to this file, was, can we legally take the 16 special conditions that were adopted and included within the site plan control agreement that's now no longer applicable and dump those into a building permit approval that's associated with a smaller barn that no longer requires site plan control? The legal answer to that through our solicitor is no, you can't. Essentially, discarding the site plan control agreement and removing that from from the applicant's requirement list negates the ability to instill those conditions. In terms of applicable law, for Chief Building Official to issue the building permit, all applicable law ought to be satisfied. And the applicable law, meaning that intensive livestock bylaw with our threshold count on livestock units, when we're underneath that cap, site plan's no longer triggered. So the permit with conditions included are very much limited compared to what we're able to do through site plan control. To Deputy Reeve Wise's comment around an analogy, we do often incorporate conditions within a building permit. And for example, one of the conditions that's tied would be a condition that speaks to prior to occupancy. So for example, this situation, the applicant is required to remove all existing beef livestock and nutrient units associated with that operation from the property prior to the occupancy of the new building and livestock facility to house swine. That being said, it's a condition that's imposed as part of the building permit approval, but it's not one of the 16 special conditions that largely focused around hydrogeology that we have come to know as council, staff, and members of the public incorporated within that site plan control agreement. So I just wanted to provide that for a bit more insight and specific as it relates to this property. Thank you.
Okay, anybody have any other questions? Go ahead, Wanda. Can't hear you.
Okay, you're going to run the risk of listening to dogs and cats, but I'll try and do my best. So I guess a quick question is, going forward, are we in a position that we can look at our zoning bylaw and ensure that no expansion can occur on that property? And if so, can we make the bylaw a little more explicit to govern some of those 16 conditions if he were to exceed what he's currently proposing?
Through you, your worship,
Go ahead.
to Councillor Lalonde's question, we do not need as a municipality to amend any bylaws, zoning bylaw, intensive livestock bylaw, and or site plan control bylaw to require the applicant to necessitate an additional approvals process to accommodate additional livestock on site. All of the bylaws in place to date would require the applicant to complete a Planning Act approvals process, site plan control, with what we have in place should the nutrient unit count wish to be expanded upon what's being provided in this new revised smaller barn.
Okay, my second question is there anything going forward, and I'm not speaking to this farm in particular, I'm speaking generically, that if a building permit were to come forward to Jake tomorrow for a similar operation as the one that we're looking at now, is there a possibility to us to change our bylaw for the building permit to include some of the things that we feel are most important in those 16 items?
Through your worship, without amending our site plan control bylaw and or our intensive livestock bylaw, if we received a similar application of scale from a nutrient unit perspective elsewhere in the municipality, we would not be able to impose regulation, for example, hydrogeology regulation or hydrological considerations on that operation with our current legislation. The bylaw has a minimum requirement of 100 livestock units, and that's the tipping point in which applicants are required to complete those forms of approval. By changing the bylaw in advance of receiving an application, knowing that we're anticipating an application of sort, the municipality would be viewed as acting in bad faith in requiring an applicant or an individual to go through one form of application process where any other applicant was not. So from my perspective and to our conversation a little earlier this evening, speaking to shoreline protection, again, that was focused around shoreline protection and an official plan update. That being said, one of the actions in which I was proposing through that would be an update to our 21-year-old site plan control bylaw, which could at that time comprehensively, looking across the municipality as a whole, give consideration to what we as council, members of the public and staff feel is appropriate in terms of regulation from site plan control perspective and not to be regulated from site plan control perspective. So I caution the action of council to amend a bylaw in a one-off situation as opposed to a comprehensive review of a bylaw that looks at giving consideration to the municipality as a whole. Thank you.
We'll go to Brian first, and then we'll go back up through.
Your Worship, I think the point that needs to be clarified, and Jason did it in a longer version, is the way to do that, Councillor Lalande, is by updating policy direction in your official plan. So if any of those 16 matters are important enough to make a statement that would be included in all site plan control, we can do that by policy. And then so that the process essentially comes in, does the construction or does the project comply with the official plan? That's one of the first matters that they meet. When we get into this situation with the site plan requirements is once the project is permitted on that site, we now need the trigger as to what needs site plan control. And that site plan control is what allows us to deal with one-off projects and consider just the project, not necessarily a policy statement that breaches everybody. So we want to make sure that we still have that site by site specific review as part of a site plan control. So when we're doing our OP update, we can look at those 16 matters and see if there's something that we apply to everyone, but we really want to make sure that that site plan control mechanism is there so that we have the ability to look at the specific project and the potential impacts to the area there. Then once they get both of those, then they can move or proceed forward to Jake's, to the CBO's application for a permit. But if there's no mechanism under the OP or site plan requirement, then they bypass both of those processes with compliance and go right to the application for the building permit. So we want to make sure that we don't apply a blanket statement to all applications that may not apply while still maintaining the ability to have that site specific consideration for future applications.
Okay. I think Kevin and then Doug, or one way. Go ahead, Doug. Oh, okay, maybe.
I
Sorry.
didn't ask the question on it. I believe we have to proceed the way we are.
Anybody else got anything to say? John, did you have some more questions there?
Well, the first two questions from Mark Oliver are more general in nature, and they address some of the stuff that Jason and Brian were just speaking about. And it's interesting that Brian has mentioned actually including some of these principles in the official plan, which I think is a good idea. I had a question specifically. Our existing nutrient management bylaw, as we know, other than its specific requirements that a large livestock project undertake a hydro-G study and one or two other things, the rest of that bylaw duplicates what now exists in the Nutrient Management Act. And we have had an opinion from our solicitor from several months back that bylaw, if challenged, would not stand up in court because, as I think most people know, anything that exists in provincial legislation supersedes any municipal bylaw. So I'm wondering at what point we should repeal that bylaw and, based on our official plan, if we want to, institute a nutrient management or intensive livestock bylaw, whatever we want to call it, that does not address what's in the Nutrient Management Act, because that would be redundant and not defensible, but add things like a requirement for a water quantity, and I would suggest a water quality study that we want to see included. And I'm just wondering what Jason would think would be the right course to take in that regard.
Through your worship and to Deputy Reeve Wise, thank you for the question. My consideration and thought on the review of both the intensive livestock bylaw and site plan control bylaw would be completed concurrently and in harmony. And I feel that we should be completing those no sooner than the amendment or update, sorry, to the 5-year OP be completed, so that this collectively assess all the changes that we consider from a policy perspective in our site plan bylaw, and have specific regulation that we may want to instill that's currently within our intensive livestock bylaw, written specifically into a new site plan control bylaw. So I see that all happening concurrently, is my plan or vision, which again follows suit following the adoption and successfully of the 5-year official plan update.
Thank you. There's certainly been a lot of research done by council, by staff, and by concerned citizens. And I would suggest that when the time comes for developing language and policy in this regard, that we take up the offer to have some of the public as at least commenting, if not in some committee form. I think that's a valuable resource, and it always helps to have plenty of eyes and ears when we're involved in something like this. So I'll just leave it at that for now. And when we come to the point where we're dealing with what you're suggesting, Jason, and I like the idea of doing these things all in harmony, I'll bring that idea of participation up again. Thank you.
Brian, you have something to say?
I do. It was a good kind of link into the first question put forth this evening by CCCE, which was regards to the public process and what was envisioned for that. And it's important that council, who will be guiding that process, and the reason that I put kind of council on notice is that we have to find a balance between the mandate that was given in 2015, where our council directed our staff to attempt to remove red tape as there was a perceived development process, as well as possibly including a public process into site plan control. You know, what triggers that? What requires that public process? Is it an agricultural operation within a certain distance? Is it, you know, we don't know what those restrictions are, but we need to start brainstorming as part of that process. You know, and to the CCE's question is, what is going to be the desired public process, if any, that council wants to include as site plan control? That's not a question that we're going to answer today, but as part of our policy creation, it's far better to create that policy and that directive when there's not an application under consideration than it is at a later time when somebody could be negatively impacted or a delay could be incurred for an application. I mean, it's very difficult. We've had the discussion in-house as far as what would be a common ground for a process, and it's very difficult given the number of site plan applications we've had with no comment to then balance that with this one that has received significant public input. So it's something that council is going to need to provide direction on as far as a public process and at what time when it comes time for that policy.
Great, thank you. Anybody else got anything to say? And I agree with everybody here 100% going down the road. There's some different things we can change and get people involved. But as of right now, I'm just going to say a couple words here. With these last two files here, the building permit before and now, and our staff all the way through, we've answered all the questions that people wanted. We've gone out our way to do that. We spent hundreds of hours on these two files. And I think it's time to move on and let Mr. Slack go about his farm business and let him have a life there without somebody looking over his shoulder all the time. So I think it's time that everybody should move on this application. Anyway, with that being said, I need a motion to receive the report. Moved by John, second by Kevin. All in favor? Carried. Okay, we have one item under items for information, municipal modernization program intake 2. Anybody want to discuss anything on that or just receive? Brian, do you have something?
I do. From the time we put this on the agenda to the time our actual agenda is related, the County of Lennox and Addington is submitting application as part of phase 2 for the development approvals process. to actually implement the recommendations of that report. I believe there was discussions held through County Council to support that second round application. So there is an application being put forth from the county that has us included as well. If there's other application, we would do so, but there is a focus on shared service, and with one of our greatest partners already included in another application, we would need to focus on some other mutual interest that would be of benefit.
Any questions for Brian? Okay, can I have a motion to receive that report? Moved by Wanda, second by Debbie. All in favor? Great. Okay, any new business or statements from members? Start with Doug, and then we'll go to Sherry. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, a question on the Camden East Library. Is any update on that? I'm interested in seeing the building removed so that we can get the place cleaned up and start looking at whether we're having a parkette there or a post office or what we're doing. So, but it has to start by removal, and it seems to be dragging. Can Jake update us?
You there, Jake?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go ahead.
Yes, Councillor Davison, still waiting for the building permit application for the demolition from the selected contractor, West and North Demolition. Still waiting for a couple of other items from them. Yeah, I know last week they let me know that they were having some trouble getting Hydro One there to put some protection on the wires on County Road 1 so that they could safely begin the demolition, which they'll be largely working on the second story off of a Zoom boom in close proximity to those wires on the north side of the building, and they'll be working off the Zoom boom for the south and west portions of the building as well, where they're going to be delicately taking down that second story, probably by hand. But yeah, that's the update of where it's at. I can call them again and ask them, for a greater update as to.
Well, I guess my question would be, can we support them in any way to help them proceed? Is there anything that we can do in a way that would help them, support them, with Hydro or whoever? Because I think it's imperative that we show something there and get done. And of course, we do have follow-up contact coming with the Postal Service to see what the story is, then what we're going to do there. But if nothing else, we've got to get planning. And so I'd appreciate it if you could support them in any way, Jake.
Yeah, I can reach out to them and ask them if there's anything we can do to help maybe get Hydro there to put that protection on the wires that they need.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to Sherry, then to Debbie. Go ahead, Sherry.
I just wanted to mention that the Friends of the Napanee River last week had their annual general meeting, and right after that short meeting, there was a presentation by Mark Boone, who we all know is hydrogeologist for Quinney Conservation. It was just a really informative 45-minute slide presentation on drought prevention, and he talked about weather and water recycling and conservation. And I just wondered, I don't know if this would need a motion or anything, but if we could have that presentation put on our social media, our Facebook page, and on our township website for people to be able to access that.
Go ahead, Brian. Maybe you can answer that.
Your Worship, following the update forwarded by the three committees that are attached, we've made arrangement for Mark Boone to present to our council on February 16th. So he's going to do a delegation to council, and our plans were after our council being given that presentation that we would look for that and then post that on our social media pages as soon as council receives that presentation, if that's acceptable by council. But he has confirmed his attendance and willingness for that meeting.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay with that, Sherry?
Yeah, that's great.
Good. Debbie, you had your hand up?
Yeah, it's just wondering, Jake, he's gone again. If you have any timeline or that we can start looking at the services that they have been waiting all winter on in Camden East. I've had some people come forward with concerns in regard to lack of postal service and traveling to get their mail or whatever. And if we could maybe put something out to the public, maybe, no, council is working towards the finish.
Yes, Councillor Thompson, the last word still that I've had with Canada Post or the representatives of Canada Post was that they were going to work towards seeing if they could get some sort of a deal made with the two other commercial outlets in Camden East to, you know, get a post office, not wait for a building to be built, but get a post office in a building right away and get that service up and going again. That was probably October, and I haven't received any other. They said that if they needed a building built, that they would swing back, and they couldn't reach a deal, they would come back to us. And I haven't had any correspondence with them since then.
Could we maybe request some update correspondence from them?
Yeah, I could send them an email and ask them how things are going, what the plan is.
Okay. Thank you.
Kevin, do you have your hand up earlier?
I was just going to ask, is Mark Moon going to do the same presentation as he has on the website already?
I suspect it's going to be slightly different, Councillor Richmond.
Okay.
Just given
Great.
time constraint of a 15-minute delegation, but I think he's going to go into the basis of the plan and the details, and then he's got a presentation that would be attached. I assume that will be part of his delegation as the presentation for council's information and the public, and then he'll try to kind of synopsis that down in a 15-minute window, and then we can post for public information after our council receives that presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, John.
Yes, thank you. I attended the virtual Roma conference a few days ago, last week, I guess, Monday and Tuesday. Most of it was not very relevant or particularly interesting. Frankly, a lot of it was just empty words by politicians. But there were a couple of workshops I attended that were quite interesting. One on flood mitigation. There was a particularly interesting presentation by a CAO of a municipality in the western end of Lake Erie. And if you think we have shoreline problems on Lake Ontario here, you should live down there. They've got a dike system at one place where the dike and high shoreline is being undermined, and right behind it is 1,600 acres of prime farmland, which could be inundated. These are big and dramatic issues. But the one that was of more practical information for us was one on cannabis and on the types of illegal operations that we had here. And there were Ray Callery, the Napanee CAO, spoke, as well as a couple of other officials, including a woman who works with the OPP, who has been in drug policy at the federal level and now with the OPP. She was very informative. The OPP have taken the initiative to have samples of some of the confiscated cannabis from these illegal medical marijuana operations, of having these samples analyzed for pesticide residue. And I hadn't even thought about this, but these people are using 7 different banned pesticides. I assume that would be things like DDT, which haven't been used in Canada for decades, for good reason. And they've also been using legal pesticides, but at rates hundreds to 1,000 times the recommended limit. So people who get this medical marijuana are going to be smoking poison. So there's a human safety aspect that I hadn't even thought about to this. One of the people mentioned changing the zoning for these operations to commercial or industrial and creating new tax classes. And I know we're gathering information on this, so I would suggest to Brian and Jason that they check out the legality. I know it's classed as an agricultural crop. I don't know if you can zone it industrial, but that would be certainly one way to impose some financial pressure on these people. And the other thing, which I asked Ray Callery, and he didn't have an answer for me, was even if the operation is legal, when pot starts to bud, it starts to stink. It gets really skunky if you've ever been anywhere near it, and you get a few hundred plants. If you're only 50 or 100 meters away from a neighbor downwind and they've got asthma or some kind of sensitivity, it's very annoying and very uncomfortable for them. So we've got to get information on how to establish separation distances. We've got that through OMAFRA for livestock operations for odor. It's a formula. Nobody seems to have any way to address it from the standpoint of cannabis. So I'm not sure where we're at in our information gathering during the time that we've got our interim control bylaw in effect. But I'm wondering if we could get an update on that for a future meeting and have some of these considerations addressed. Thanks.
Good enough. Brian, go ahead.
Your Worship, just to kind of respond to that, a lot of the CAOs within our jurisdiction, in our region specifically, Deputy Reeve Wise, have been supporting Mr. Callery with a lot of the details of our area, and especially the East Region OPP have been providing him data as well. There is a task force that's been created through AMO to try to improve Health Canada and the enforcement's involvement in these types of operation. A lot of discussion surrounding minimum distance separations as far as odor, whether we can ensure that they have to be in a commercial or industrially zoned property, or whether we can require them to site specifically plan zoning on specific properties. But there are some challenges that are before the courts right now as far as human rights capabilities, as everybody is granted the opportunity to grow what is deemed to be a legal product. So there is some contributing factors there that I don't think we're going to get an immediate response to, but we can impose our preferences as part of that review. One thing, publicly and to council and to anybody that will listen is we've put out 2 separate calls for commenting, and given the time during COVID and that we're under lockdown, and previously, we had service revisions, we've put comment out and haven't necessarily received any formal writing comments that we can include, but we've received a few phone calls that just kind of reinforce some of the concerns that we've brought across our table with the complaints when they were active in the summer. So we are looking for more input. It hasn't been as active as we were hoping that it would be, especially given the number of concerns that we had brought to us in the summer. But we're pushing, and we're actually going to do another round of requests just because the first one did not receive many suggestions or inputs to that process. But we are coming up on the 1-year process that we need to conclude down to some recommendations and requirements for that production capability.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, and I think it's important to make people aware. We're not talking about restricting anyone's right to medical marijuana. It's been shown to be valuable in treating many conditions and to give relief from nausea and chemo and so on and so forth. I think that's great. But when you're growing your medical marijuana, you've also got to consider the impact it will have on the health of your neighbors. And so it's another one of these balancing acts. As far as information gathering, Brian, I wonder if we could go beyond the social media request and just get the local paper to do a story. Stone Mills Township seeks input on cannabis regulation or something like that. That might draw a few more comments. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, with that being said, we're going to go into, you have something you wanted first before we go to closed session? Yeah, gotta go. Can't hear you.
I noticed in the paper, in the Napanee paper, that on a regular basis, the Greater Napanee provides these mini minutes, they call it. I hope I'm using the right term. And it just gives it's a really, seems to be a fairly effective way of reaching people and letting them know what's going on. And I wonder if that's something that our council would like to consider doing. Even if it was quarterly in the Scoop, or, well, the Beaver's a pretty good little reference for a lot of people in this area.
Everybody's thoughts on that for now, or? I guess you get no reaction, Linda, but. Anyway, with that being said and done, we are going to take a few minutes and we're going to move into closed session.
Do we have a different Zoom for that one, Christina? Or are we just staying on?
Brian, fill everybody in.
I believe, Your Worship, as mentioned prior to council, there is a second link that has been emailed to all council members. They will log out of this meeting once the treasurer gives us the okay that the streaming is stopped. We will log out of this meeting and then we'll log into the link of the closed session.
You want us to stay here, Brian, until she tells